Winter, if you would both give a brief introduction about how you decided to run for office and what your thoughts are on that. And so let's go ahead and kick off with Senator Winter.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And it is always fun to be with Jess and with Aaron. I've worked with both of them on numerous projects and consider them co-conspirators. So I'm very happy to be here today. As my bio said, I am an organizer at heart. And for what that means for me is I build power through people and by bringing people together. And that's what I've been doing my entire career, regardless of my titles I've had. So I've been an executive director, I've been a mayor pro tem, a senator, but really what I'm doing is I'm bringing people together. And so my journey to running for office really has two very significant steps. And the first was in college, I worked at a homeless shelter. And my job was to support my clients and help them find permanent housing. And when we did that, I would go from landlord to landlord, from apartment complex to apartment complex, talking about how primarily these single moms who work 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs would be responsible tenants, they'd pay their rent on time, they'd be good community members. And I heard no again and again and again. And even though the work I was doing was very meaningful, it was a very temporary band-aid to an incredibly broken system. And I heard no because most of them didn't make 3 times the rent, which is a general requirement. And if you're working 3 minimum wage jobs and you still don't make 3 times the rent and you can't find a place to live, that is a systemic problem. And I wanted to go change the system. And I went to community organizing school for environmental organizing, an organization called Green Corps. And from there, I learned how you could empower people to use their voice to create that systemic change I wanted to see. And I was born and raised in Colorado. I'm a 5th generation Coloradan. And so I moved back to Colorado as fast as I could and worked on college campuses to organize young folks to ask for renewable energy. And we'd go to the Capitol and I'd train them how to lobby and speak at committee hearings. And along the way, I met Senate President Joan Fitzgerald, who was the first woman president of the Senate in Colorado. And I was 25 years old. I was a new organizer. And to me, she was just this giant of change and inspiration and a mentor. And one day I said, "You're so good at your job. How are you so good at this?" And she said, "We're only as good as the teams we bring, and we need better people to run for office, and you should run." And so I was 25 years old. I was like, "Wait, me? You think I should, Senator Fitzgerald?" And it blew my mind. And I never looked back. I've run 5 campaigns now. I've won 5 campaigns. But along the way, many of the jobs and positions I've had, I've been honored and privileged to issue that invitation for others to run again and again and again, because we know that women often have to be invited to run. They have to be validated. They need someone that says, "Hey, I see you. I see your leadership. I see your talent. I see your passion and potential, and you should run for office." And so I've tried to replicate that invitation that Joan gave to me over and over again all across the country.
Great. Thank you for that. What an inspiring beginning for you. And Jess, what about you? Tell us about your start.
Yeah, absolutely. Much like Senator Winter, I also consider myself an organizer at heart and an advocate at heart. And I used to think that for me, that really started when I got involved in my high school student council. But upon looking back, this advocate and this desire to push for change has really always been a part of me. My parents like to tell a story about when I was 8 years old. And one summer we drove across the country in a van. My mom was sick of the Colorado heat, wanted to go see family that had pools in their backyard. So we did a cross country road trip, and we stopped at the Field Museum in Chicago. And when we were there, I kept seeing animals in the display cases. And my cute 8-year-old brain thought that the animals were being killed out in the wild or in zoos to be put in the museum displays. So I asked my parents a ton of questions about it. And we got home, and a few weeks later, my parents come home from work to find that I have used all of the printer paper in the house. And I have printed letters to my mayor and to President Bush at the time, and to members of Congress, and to everybody I could think of, every CEO I could think of, all of Congress, because I wanted them to stop killing animals for museum displays. Now, my misunderstood but well-intentioned advocacy efforts really started with, in a child's eye, but still started with seeing something that I thought was wrong and saying, hey, I think that I should say that this is wrong. Why is nobody saying that this is wrong? And from there, once I had a better understanding of how the world worked, I took that same spirit to my high school, whether it was, trying to have a more engaged student council where my issue of the day was really school spirit, all the way to college. And my junior year in high school, I ran for student body president and I lost. And I decided that I was going to take a break from student council. I was offered the opportunity, I won second place, and I was offered the opportunity to run for senior class president. And I did, and I had a great year, but I really felt the sting of that rejection. And I think as a woman, and especially as a young woman, as soon, when you put yourself out there to run for any office, and as soon as you get rejected in any way, you really feel that sting and you really wonder, am I good enough? So I went to the University of Denver, took my kind of leadership experience to the Pioneer Leadership Program there. And my first year on campus, I wasn't really involved in student government for the first time since I'd been a freshman in high school. And I found that I really missed being tied to my community. I really missed understanding what was happening. And so I decided to run again and was a sophomore representative, and then ran for student body vice president in 2015. And when I decided to run for campus-wide office to represent all of DU, much like that initial spirit of my 8-year-old self who said something is wrong and I want to speak out about it. I had recently been sexually assaulted, and this was at a time when sexual assault on college campuses was really just becoming a national issue. And I said, I could really make a change by being a survivor who can be in the room with the chancellor and be part of leadership. But that wasn't the only thing I cared about. I knew that just like that mattered so much to me, all of my fellow students had an issue that had changed their campus experience, or maybe wasn't making it everything that they could be, and that I had the power to change that. And so I decided to run, and really happened to be at a wonderful moment in time where students were being listened to about this issue. We were able to, organize and mobilize and to use internal and pressure to change things. And from there, I took on leadership in the movement to end campus sexual assault. I went and ran an organization for a while called End Rape on Campus. I worked at the White House, who had been a huge champion of this issue. And I actually got to work with Senator Winter in 2018 and 2019. It took us 2 years, but we got to work together to pass a bill to make Colorado's Title IX laws and protections for campus student survivors some of the best in the country, in the face of some really difficult federal regulations that were making it hard to fight for the kinds of changes that I had fought for as a student elected official. So that's a little bit about my story, but I think the important through line there, both through mine and through Senator Winters, is seeing something that feels wrong and knowing that you can use your voice to change that. And more importantly, you can use your voice to work with others to mobilize and organize together to change that.
Great. And one other thing I noticed that's a through line is that the difference that women with their own lived experience can make when they bring that experience forward to say something about policy, like that maybe you wouldn't hear from the guys. So so it is important to bring forward that lived experience.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like that you had some barriers. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the barriers you faced and how you overcame them, Jess, and then same question for Senator Winter after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of multiple layers of barriers. You're dealing with systemic sexism as a woman or a gender nonconforming person who's thinking about running for office. And with that, you get your own internal doubts that you're trying to manage. And then you also have people around you bringing their internalized sexism and ideas about what it means to be a woman or a gender nonconforming or transgender person in office. And then you have to hear it from them too. And so a lot of my barriers, once I was able, my first barrier in deciding not to run for student government my freshman year in college was really self-doubt. Am I good enough? You know, I didn't win this last race. Do I want to put myself out there? And that's something that you have to negotiate with yourself. You know, you have to be able to know yourself and know that your worth is not defined by whether you win or lose, but your worth is defined by your commitment to putting yourself out there, by your commitment to your community to try. And that was hard for me. You know, I was 18, so I had to, you know, think through that. And when I did decide to put myself back out there and ran again, the next barrier was really gendered when I decided to run for student body vice president. You run on a same ticket at my university. It's different everywhere, but you run on the same ticket. And every single time in the past, oh man, I think like 18 years, maybe it was a little bit less than that, but every time that a woman had been at the top of the ticket, that ticket had lost. And so when I knew that I wanted to run, and I had a couple of people approach me, and all of them were men who approached me to say, do you want me to be president and you can be vice president? And I really had to negotiate with myself. You know, I was driven by my lived experience and by what I knew was happening in my community. And I knew that I also had enough experience to run and be president if I wanted to. And ultimately, I decided to run with a very good friend, knowing that we could, you know, recognize the sexist landscape that we were in, that our university didn't seem to elect women as president, but that he and I could function in a co-equal way. And he was a trusted friend. He was a gender ally and advocate. And so I ran as vice president, he ran as president, but we really functioned as, you know, co-equals. And that made a huge difference. You can't always change the sexist landscape that you operate in as a woman who wants to run for office, but you can figure out how to navigate it. And that's something that you have to do within your own boundaries and within your own values. And looking back, I don't know, maybe I would say, no, I'm gonna run for president and I think I would be really good. But we made a lot of change and I got to do student government with one of my best friends. And I'm proud of the way that we recognized what barriers we needed to work around instead of just letting ourselves be stopped by them completely.
Great.
Yeah, and I will echo that. I think many of those barriers that Jess named, I faced as well. And just talking about, am I good enough? Am I the person? Because part of running for office, when I ran for city council, and Westminster is 110,000 people, part of it is saying, I'm the one out of 110,000 people that should have this seat. And Jess has used the term power several times. And one of the things I want to name is that often women don't like saying, I want power, because it's seen so negatively, but power is actually just a tool and you can use power in a good way. And I think more often than not, women build power on behalf of community and not for individual ego. And so but naming that and saying that out loud is really scary, to say, I want power. And I am a incredibly privileged white woman with a powerful title of state senator, and I still have imposter syndrome. I still walk into rooms and think, am I the one that should be negotiating this? Am I the one that should be here? Am I the right person? And that is so ingrained in us because of how society views and treats women growing up. And, you know, the idea of women in leadership is changing, but it's still really hard. So author Anne Quindlen said, elected women are expected to be tough as nails and warm as toast, right? And that is nearly an impossible role to fill. How are you tough as nails and also really warm? How are you soft enough and embracing enough and doing the women's work? And how are you tough enough to be man enough for the job, right? And we know that especially if we don't have 30% women in an elected body, which we do in Colorado, thank goodness, you basically have to be man enough for the job and act like man enough for the job, but people also expect you to be warm. And you look at that throughout history on how women get treated when they cry, right? Hillary Clinton's tears, Pat Schroeder's tears were famous when she was running for president. I've cried all over the Capitol building, right? But that goes to, how are you tough enough? How are you warm enough? And ultimately, we are seen as wife and mothers first. And so when I'm on a campaign trail, so I have 2 children, I have been elected since 2007. So I've been elected for 14 years. My kids are 10 and 12. So I had both my children in office. They don't know another life. But when I'm on a campaign trail and I go door knocking, I often get asked, who's taking care of your children? I get told I'm a bad mom repeatedly. And that's really hurtful, right? Or I get asked, is your husband babysitting? No, he's not babysitting. He's actually parenting. It turns out, right? And so we're still seen as wife and mothers, and I'm a married woman with kids, and that's a detriment. But I also have trained and worked with a lot of women that if they're single, then their dating life becomes an issue. If they are married and don't have kids, then it becomes an issue of why didn't you choose to have kids? Or are you going to choose to have kids? And everyone wants to talk about it. And no one actually, so regardless of the spectrum of where you are as a woman, your wife and motherhood gets questioned. And it's even worse for GLBTQ women, right? Because then they want to know everything. And so that becomes a problem as well. And when we talk about parenting, so I call it public momming. And another big important part of my journey was then State Representative Karen Milton would bring her baby to the Capitol. I was like, oh, you can do this, right? And then I was like, I can do this and have children, and I bring my children everywhere. But even recently as last week, I was told that my children were being distracting in a meeting, whereas I work very closely with Representative Matt Gray, and he brings his children everywhere. And when he brings his children to meetings in the Capitol, he's treated like Dad of the Year. Like people just start throwing trophies at him, and I'm treated as an inconvenience, right? And so this idea of being wife and mother first becomes really hard. And then, of course, there's image, right? So one, you're supposed to be a wife and mom, and you're supposed to be beautiful if you want to run for office. And so we called it at the White House Project, and it still exists, the 3 H's: your hair, your hemlines, and your husband, right? Male candidates are more likely to be covered on their stances or their voting record if they have one, and women are more likely to be covered on who their kids are, who their husband is, and what they look like. So for example, in the last campaign that I was in, a radio show host called me overweight and unpleasant. And that's why people shouldn't vote for me, right? And that's painful. Look, like I'm a woman in America. I clearly have body issues. Like that's just true. So it hurts, right? And you're like, oh my God, I need to lose the next 10 pounds. And like, I shouldn't be having this, whatever I was eating for dinner. But you internalize it and you get over it quickly. And then we used it, and I raised $15,000 off of that, because we sent out an email and did phone calls and had a fundraiser and got all the women together, and we're like, hey, this dude called me overweight and unpleasant. And so people often say you have to have tough skin to be in politics. And I don't have tough skin. Like I said, I've cried all over the Capitol building. I've cried with Jess in that building, right? And you don't have to have tough skin. You have to have resilient skin, and you have to have the strength and tenacity to keep going.
And if I could just add to that really quickly, I think that Senator Winter is a better elected official for being in touch with those feelings and with those tough times. Like when our bill failed or we were facing difficulties together, being with somebody who knew how to navigate power, but also who could recognize me in my humanity was healing for me as an advocate and really important. And I often think that women are better elected officials because they understand lived experience. They're thinking as, family members, as friends. They're thinking about bringing everybody to the table, and their empathy is considered a weakness, when actually for many women elected officials, it's their greatest strength. And I think the other thing that, I was listening to you talk, Senator Winter, I was just reflecting on some of the things that have been said to me, and some of the things that I hear about people who, get opposite criticism of me. And I think the truth is, if you are a woman, if you are a person of color, if you are disabled or queer, the truth is they're going to use something against you no matter what. It's not about who you are. It has nothing to do with who you are as a person. And I wish I could have seen that from that critique when I was younger, that if somebody's telling me that I'm too loud or I'm too bossy, that's not because there's something wrong with me. That's because that's how they have been trained to view a advocating woman, a powerful woman, a woman who says, no, I want to be in leadership. And that's not about who I am as a person. So you can be absolutely perfect. You can beat every single one of the critiques that people have for you, and they will still find something. And so it's better to focus on accepting who you are before you run, rather than trying to change who you are or lose those 10 pounds before you decide to throw your hat in the ring.
Yeah, and I love what you both are bringing up about being authentic and that, being authentic and developing that resilience in yourself, like those two things together, it's almost like a superpower that you need to develop and cultivate in yourself. Because I think, especially when you're campaigning, and I noticed this myself, we didn't say it into the introduction, but I just ran for city council. It seems like everybody wants something different from you. I mean, this group wants this thing and this other group wants the opposite thing. And, if you're not familiar with the issue, you kind of have to figure it out on the fly. And it can be hard to stay in that authentic place and to also be resilient. So those are super qualities that I hope folks are hearing in our audience. So thanks for talking about those barriers and those qualities. I'm wondering what advice you would give to young women and girls who don't think they have a place in politics.
I would say our very democracy relies on having you at the table. And so we know, and we've done the academic studies, right, that when we have diverse views and voices in the room, we're better at solving problems. Because how are we going to solve problems if we're all homogenous older men that are lawyers, right? That brings a specific certain view to how you solve problems, the solutions you seek out, how you view the world, right? And instead, when we have people of color and young people and older folks and LGBTQ people and women and trans folks at the table, you actually have the ability to solve problems in a more holistic way and in a way that's more inclusive. You're also more likely to be able to work together and across the aisle. We have a lot of studies that show women are more likely to have more co-sponsors on their bills. They're more likely to bring more money back to their districts. They're more likely to pass bipartisan legislation. And I think it's because we, our entire lives, have been leading from the foot of the table and building power by bringing people together and believing that we need to lift as we rise, right? And I think that's really important to do. So for example, I had my first child in 2009. I was newly pregnant. I had not told my city council I was pregnant yet, because it's those early weeks when you're nervous and you don't tell anyone. But we were appointing people to boards and commissions. And there was this woman, she was amazing, who was a land attorney. She had a lot of passion and experience, and we were appointing people to our planning commission. And she was clearly the best candidate. I said, I think we need to appoint this woman. And everyone else on city council at the time could have been my parent, if not my grandparent, and just had a different view on how the world worked. And one older white gentleman said, well, I don't think she's the time to serve. And then the other one was like, yeah, I think, she might not show up to meetings. And I looked at them, I said, she's highly qualified. And it turns out women can use their brain and their uterus at the same time. Right? And this is an illegal conversation. One, it's illegal, but two, culturally, we can do both things at once. And it just stopped everyone in the room. My city staff were like, whoa, did that just happen? Right? But if I hadn't been a young pregnant woman in the room, she wouldn't have been appointed, right? And that's why we need the diversity of views at the table. And so to anyone that thinks you don't belong, that is the reason you belong. Because those feelings of feeling like you don't belong is the exact same reasons you do, and why you will add to the solutions that are going to save our world.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you were going to walk into a boardroom and see a concerning lack of diversity and wonder, can this company make decisions that are inclusive or fully thought through for what they'll impact all communities? You should bring that same framework of, I don't know about this, to your government, which arguably is making decisions that affect your and your community's everyday lives a heck of a lot more than a remote boardroom. We talk a lot about, oh yeah, it's great to have women in politics, but we don't talk about the personal kind of sacrifice and work that has to happen to either develop that thick skin or to develop that resilient skin. I also don't have very thick skin, and it's been really hard for me to put myself out there and to, take that criticism and to not think of it as personal. But I know that one, whatever that person has to say about me, chances are isn't about me. And two, you can only ever be truly rejected by people who truly know you. So, power makers who don't truly know you, or voters who don't know the true you, they are rejecting their projection of you, and you know you. I remember when I was working at the White House, I heard Michelle Obama come and talk about knowing herself. And I went home and I wrote in my journal and I was like, how do I figure out how I can know myself the way that she knows herself? Because anytime somebody would ask her a question about how did you decide to do this, or how did you decide to deal with this difficulty, she talked about turning inward. And being a woman in the world, it is really hard to maintain that sense of self when you're having messaging from every side, mostly ad driven, telling you that you could be a better woman or a different woman or a different person that would be more likable. And over the past couple of years, I've done a lot of personal work on trying to know and stay with my true self. And I think that that is one thing that is important to have whenever you do throw your hat in the ring, or the resiliency to know, hey, I'm going to get my feelings hurt. And I'm not quite there in terms of being able to side with myself every time, but I know how to be resilient and get back on. One of those two things, either you're working on it or you've developed it, are really important, because at the end of the day, no matter what office you serve in, you are your most precious and important thing. And when you walk away from office, it's just going to be you and you, not you and your constituents, not you and, whatever reporter wrote a hit piece on you. It's going to be you and you. And so really doing that inward work and sticking with yourself and, trying to emulate Michelle Obama and really know yourself and trust that you know yourself. And I think that personal work is a really important part of being any woman or gender nonconforming or a person of color, anybody who's not a straight white older man who wants to put themselves in the arena.
Yeah, trust yourself and find your good friends.
Yes.
Because when you're elected, you suddenly become the most popular person in the room, and everyone wants to be your friend, and it's not authentic friendship. It's not deep friendship. And that's really hard to navigate, especially when I was first elected, right? And so when I look at legislating, there's a lot of lobbyists that want to have drinks with me. They want to relate with me. They want to ask me about my kids and my dogs. And it's all very nice, but they're not my true deep friends. And being able to distinguish who your true deep friends are has made the biggest difference in my elected life. And being able to have those people's backs in ways that you never knew you'd have to do. But politics can be hard, and it can be really positive, and it can be really uplifting. But having your true friends to have your back and also do all the celebrating with is really important.
Well, and I've noticed too that personal work and turning inward, that it's not something that you do just once. It's an ongoing process, and maybe you do it once and then you need to do it again in a month or 6 months or whatever it is. So it's not like a one and done, unfortunately. It's that journey that we're all on. So so thank you for that. That's great advice. Let's turn now to the practical and the tangible for the youth that are in this, watching this panel. I'm wondering, what practical, tangible steps could they take to get more involved in their community, even if they don't want to run? Jess, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first decided that I wanted to run for student body vice president, obviously I had my personal experience at DU, I had my friends' experience, but I felt it was really important before jumping in to really make sure that I was understanding what the collective experience was, that I was exploring my blind spots, that I was thinking about what it would be like for somebody who is completely different than me. And so we did a huge listening tour before we decided whether or not we were going to throw our names in. We were pretty sure, we were putting the time in to meet with more than 200 students or student organizations. But for those 3 weeks leading up to deciding that we were going to put our name in, I spent every single minute that I could just meeting with people. And every time at the end, I would say, so who do you think I need to talk to? And, you start with your ring and you say, okay, you 5 people in my life, tell me what your challenges are and who do you think I need to talk to? And then just keep going down those paths. And we started to see themes emerge. And there were clear through lines that were affecting different sections of campus or different communities, and it was affecting people differently. But we were able to identify those through lines and identify what we were able to do about them. So maybe for you, the through line isn't running for student government or running for city council, but the through line is getting involved in another way. Maybe you want to work on a campaign, be a volunteer, teach your parents how to community organize. That's been something that's been really rewarding for me, is teaching my parents. My mom used to have like her senator's phone numbers on speed dial, and that always brought me a lot of joy. It doesn't need to be something that is out there, highly visible in the world to make a difference. It just needs to be something that is true to your community. The best way to do that is to inquire about what's my experience, what are the things that are missing for me, and then to pair that with deep listening and deep intentional community relationship mapping to figure out who am I not hearing? And within that, you will see patterns and you will see things that you feel really strongly about, really excited about. Follow that excitement, because politics is hard, community organizing is hard, it's underpaid, you're underslept. The conditions are not meant for people who are on the margins of society to survive. And that's why it's the most important for you to be there. And so follow the excitement, because if you care more about what you are doing, then this really tough day or this voter who hung up the phone on you, you will be able to get up and do it again and again. So listen deeply, explore outside of your own experience, and make sure that you're covering your blind spots and follow your excitement.
Great.
So first I just want to pick up, right now it is underpaid and overworked, but I am working very hard to change that, because
Yes.
actually, so we have a campaign workers guild, the first in the country for aides and interns at the Capitol, who also work on a lot of campaigns, and they're basically unionizing. And I ran my campaign for Senate. So I ran the most competitive Senate campaign in the entire country. So there's the Republican Legislative Leadership Committee and the Democratic Legislative Leadership Committee, the RLCC and the DLCC, and they named my race in Colorado as the #1 most important race in the country. And I ran it where I didn't work on Sundays. I went hiking with my families. My campaign manager didn't work on Sundays. She went kayaking. Our organizers worked 32 hours a week until the final last month, and it was their choice how much extra they worked, and we paid them time and a half. And we had a lot of competitive races in Colorado, and I didn't have the same numbers of doors that were hit, but because people believed in me so much, every door knock made such a big difference. And so I am very strongly of the opinion that there is this culture in politics and campaigns that, well, if you don't show up for 80 hours a week, you're not passionate enough and you don't care enough, and that's not right. So I'm working to change that. But for young people looking to get involved in politics, I think really looking at both internally, what are you doing, and externally, what are you doing? So first, I want you to practice using your voice, because it's scary. And I told you that I'm a state senator. I've been elected for 17 years, and it is still scary for me to use my voice. So for example, last week I had a very big climate bill in committee, and I was super nervous to go present it. And so I wear my brightest dresses on scary days, and people know that when Senator Winter's wearing a bright dress, it means I'm messing things up or fixing things, depending on if you like it or not. But right, so like I still get scared. So practice using your voice. Send out a tweet that might make you a little nervous. Write a letter to the editor or an opinion editorial to your paper. Have a conversation with a friend or a family member about an opinion you have about an issue, right? Because practice using your voice is kind of like going to the gym, right? You get better and better each time. And each time you do it, it seems a little easier. So practice using your voice and owning your power and owning your opinion and telling your stories, because telling stories is what actually changes hearts and minds. So something I haven't talked about yet is another piece of my story is I came out about sexual harassment that was occurring at the state capitol, and sexual harassment that happened to me and at least 11 other individuals from a fellow Democrat. And I publicly called him out. Is the scariest thing I ever did. He retaliated for 5 long months in a pretty brutal fashion. And we were trying to expel him. And I walked into the chamber that morning and we did not have the votes. So to expel a representative, I didn't even have the votes of all the Democrats that morning, never mind any Republicans. And I went and I was shaking and I was crying and I told my story. And then we read letters from the other women he had harassed. And then other people told their stories of the Capitol and harassment. And at the end of the day, we got 54 votes and expelled him. And it was the first time we did it in 103 years. And it was through telling stories. And so practice telling your story, because, and Jess knows this, she tells her story being sexually assaulted, and that's really hard. And it makes you feel really vulnerable. And I want you to hear this. I'm going to say it twice. Vulnerability shows up as strength. So when you feel vulnerable telling your story, that shows up to the people you're telling your story as strength. So practice telling your story. And then we're all in this to build power and power on behalf of community. And so I want you to practice lifting others up. So for example, I have a goal, and my daughter does this now too, and she said how it's made such a difference in her 4th grade class. So every day I go into the Senate and I think of what are 3 ways that I can elevate someone else's leadership today, right? Can I tell, for example, if a press person comes to me and wants to talk about education, that's not my thing. I want to send them to the education expert, and that's elevating their leadership. I don't have to carry all the bills. So there was an important transportation bill and I put another senator on it, right? What are 3 things I can do every single day that actually expands power? Because I firmly believe that power is not limited, it's actually limitless. And we build more power by giving it away and by working together. And so what are 3 things you can do every single day to lift as you rise and give someone else power? So do the internal work, do the external work.
Great. Well, and I just really honor your work around the expelling of Steve Lovesock. I was there at the Capitol that day, and it was a powerful day. It was it was 7 hours of floor debate, and you could I could feel the tide turning. But not at the beginning. At the beginning, it didn't look like it was going to happen. So I agree that hearing those stories was very powerful, and more people telling their stories. And so I think that, that also speaks to what you were saying about using your voice, and being authentic. And so that all can come together in very important ways, because, then you went on to work on the bill to improve the workplace, there at the legislature. And, we were there, helping with that, because we really wanted to see a better work environment there. So really glad that I hope that's all better now. So
And if I could just add, Senator Winter and I both have stories of sharing our personal stories of trauma and success coming out of that. And the truth is, it won't always be successful. And so deciding ahead of time your own personal boundaries, what do I keep just for me? And what is available for public consumption? And how do I take care of myself is also a really important part of that. And honoring the work of the people who came before you. I was able to be successful in driving change through telling my story, and was widely accepted in creating change through telling my story, because so many survivors in the past year, especially women of color, had gone before me and had told their stories, and they weren't as accepted as I was, but people were primed to say, I believe you, because of the work that they had done. Future state legislators in other states where this happened, just 1 or 2 years after the expulsion of the representative who had been sexually harassing his colleagues. Other state representatives were able to stand on the shoulders of Senator Winter, and Senator Winter was able to stand on the shoulders of people who had been shut down in previous state legislatures. And so when you are out in front and you are getting the credit, it feels really rewarding and amazing, but also make sure to honor and include and bring with you the people who have gone before and who are enabling your success. And if telling your story isn't successful, that means that you've laid the path for somebody else. It doesn't mean that it was a failure or that your story is unimportant. It means that you're working against a Goliath of an issue, and it's going to take time.
And it is going to take time, and it is successful. Even if you don't get that perfect thing at the end, but someone along the way is going to be inspired by you. Someone's going to feel seen and heard by you. Someone is going to be recognized by you. You're going to inspire someone else to use their voice. So I worked very hard to pass paid family and medical leave in Colorado. I ran the bill 5 times and lost 5 times. And then we sent it to the ballot and won in spectacular fashion. But every single year I brought it, I built a bigger coalition. I told more stories. I empowered more people to tell their stories. We started changing hearts and minds through those storytelling. We also, figured out what the opposition was saying and became better and stronger in responding to what they were saying. And so every single year I brought that issue, and every single year when I lost and people were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you must be really sad." And I was like, "I'm not sad. I'm losing forward," right? I'm losing forward. And I think that's really important because on the big issues, you have to lose forward, right? Jess and I lost our Title IX bill the first year. It was awful, but we lost forward. We learned a lot. We built a coalition. We told stories. We started changing hearts and minds. And the next year we came back and we won. And so I don't look at it as a loss. It's losing forward.
Absolutely.
I love that. I'm going to remember that, losing forward. So I want to pivot now to some of the questions that we're getting from the audience. And one that jumped out at me was, what is your competitive advantage and how do you find it? Senator Winter, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So, Erin, earlier you said authenticity and resilient skin is kind of like a superpower, right? Sorry, my kids are playing fetch with my dogs behind me. Let me know if it gets too loud. But so authenticity and resilient skin is kind of like a superpower, but for your authenticity, that's different, right? And so I always ask candidates to write down the 2 words that they really want voters to remember about them. So when they check off Faith Winter, right? And I want them to think that I am hardworking and that I bring people together. Maybe you want voters to remember that you listen and you have tenacity, or maybe that you're a problem solver, right? So what feels at your core of who you are as a leadership, as a leader, right? And so think about the leaders you admire and why you admire and what those qualities are, right? Not just that you love Michelle Obama because she's a really good speaker, but what do you love about her when she says something, right? Because maybe that's what you love about yourself in your leadership. And so think about those 2 things. And then it's really important to show the voters who you are, which is why we tell stories, because I could come on here and say, I work really hard and I bring people together. But instead, today I've told you stories about losing paid family leave 5 times and still winning, and losing Title IX and still winning, right? That shows you I work hard. I didn't tell you. You didn't have to believe me. I actually showed you who I was. When I talked about bringing people together, I talked with Jess about working with rape survivors, right? I talked about working with climate activists. I tell stories about working with farmers and ranchers on climate, right? I can show you I can bring people together. So think of those 2 things you want voters to remember about you, and then think about the stories that show them that without telling them that.
So powerful. And Senator Winter is one of the best storytellers in the biz. So pay attention, because it takes a lot of time to look at your repertoire of experience and say, this story illustrates X, and X will drive that person to action. She's not just telling the stories because they're good stories, but because they are illustrative and because you can get it almost immediately. And that's super powerful. In a similar vein, I would say that my competitive advantage is connecting with others and finding a way to turn that into coalition building. When I was in student government, I was able to forge partnerships with the frattiest of frat guys who thought that student government was the dumbest thing that anyone could ever do in college. But I just kept working at it and kept finding ways to engage them. Sometimes I would go to bars on nights when I wasn't even going out so that that person would remember me as like, oh, I remember seeing you on Friday. And then I would ask them about their experience. And then we'd turn that into something else. And we really formed a patchwork quilt of coalition members who were able to care about campus sexual assault, who it didn't come up in their everyday experiences. And that really requires connection and seeing something from another person's perspective. I think my empathy is a superpower in that, but also just asking good questions and listening and being really excited to connect with people.
Okay, great. Well, let's see if we can fit in a couple more questions here. I'm wondering, so one question was, how do you know who or what feedback to consider in this public role? And so to me, that question is about trust also, like who do you know who to listen to? And so, Jess, what did you learn about that?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I always think about, well, I love the quote that Brene Brown uses all the time. I believe it's Teddy Roosevelt quote about, if you're in the arena, if you spend your time listening to people who are, throwing rocks from the stands, who are outside the arena, you won't be able to stay in. You got to stay in the arena and kind of forget everyone else. And I think it's a great sentiment, but you can't learn from that, from just saying, I'm going to forget these people. So instead, I think really selectively about, is this person in the arena in their life in some way? Have they put themselves out there? Do they understand the power dynamics? Or, are they at least rooting for people in the arena? And then I always listen for, is this person telling me something that is similar to something that I've heard before? Or does it feel like it's coming out of left field? Because if it's similar to something I've heard before, that's a pattern. That's something for me to really note that may be a weakness for me as a candidate or as a professional and is really important. And then 3, why is this person telling me this? Is this person telling me this because they've projected something onto my op-ed in the Washington Post that they actually don't know me, have no connection to, and they really don't care? Okay, I can forget that. But if this is coming from a friend or a colleague or someone who's on my team or somebody who's been working in opposition to me and who is lodging a complaint that is, their perspective and important for me to listen to. So I really just kind of think through, why are they telling me this? What perspective are they coming from? And are they in the arena in some way in their own lives? Because people who are in the arena in some way, they think about the feedback that they're giving you more critically, and they're usually giving it to you with an eye toward how hard it is to be in the arena.
And Senator Winter?
So I think trust and taking feedback are completely different things, right? I will take feedback from everyone all the time. And then trust is different. So actually, this last Tuesday, I've mentioned my climate bill I had up, which is Senate Bill 200. But we had a Tuesday afternoon committee, and we were getting the verdict on the case about George Floyd's murder. And I am working on this bill with a lot of communities of color, and we were waiting for history to be made. And so what I did is I paused committee and I said, we are going to wait. We are not going to hear this bill until 30 minutes after the verdict, because I wanted to give time for everyone to react. And what we did is a whole bunch of people piled into my office. It probably was not COVID compliant. Don't tell anyone. We were wearing masks, but we all piled into my office. And there's lobbyists that were against Senate Bill 200. There was lobbyists that were for Senate Bill 200. There was people from the governor's office who doesn't like Senate Bill 200. And we all held that moment together and watched history. And then we went and battled in committee, right? And we battled for 7 hours in committee. And I think that's a pretty unique way to view that question that Erin asked. These people that were in my office, I trusted with my heart in that moment to watch history. and I took their feedback on why they hated my bill, but it doesn't mean I agreed with them, right? And so I think there's a difference between feedback and trust. And it has taken me a long time, and I still don't always get it right on who to trust and who to take feedback, because I wear my heart on my sleeve. I let everyone in, but that's also what makes me authentic, and I'm not going to change that. And sometimes I get burned, frankly, in politics, because so much of politics is transactional and some of it's really transformative. And if you view it as only transactional, you will never be transformative. And then those people that I hold really close to my heart. I think when I don't have a title, when I'm no longer a senator, when I no longer have power, when I am an old lady sitting on my porch, who do I want there with me that will still care about me, right? It's probably not that lobbyist, but for example, Senator Brittany Pedersen is my best friend in the Senate. I was in her wedding. I was a bridesmaid. We have held each other through some of the hardest legislative battles we've ever had. And we do politics together every day. We fix bills and amend bills and work together. But I know when I am an old lady on a porch with no power, Brittany's going to be there, and I'll be there for her. And I think that's the difference between trust and who you listen to. But I listen to everyone, whether they hate what I'm doing or they love what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, thank you for those rich and full answers and the stories and the points that you raised about how to think things through. I think all this has just been an incredible hour that we've just had together, and I'm so grateful to have heard your perspectives, and I'm sure that our audience is also. So thank you so much, Jess Davidson, and thank you, Senator Winter, for being here today. We're grateful for your wisdom and your insight and your passion and your enthusiasm. And yes, as we're seeing in the chat, unfortunately, one of our panelists couldn't make it here today. Jiva Nathan is sick, so we're sorry to miss her, and we hope that she feels better soon. So I'm going to hand it over now. I think I'm handing it over to, is it Claire or no, Adelita? No, Claire. So there you are.
Yes, here I am. Thank you all so much. With that, we're moving on to the general session. I put that link in the chat. So we'll see you, and then we'll see Senator Winter and maybe Jess for later networking. So thank you all so much for coming.